GTC 2024 NVIDIA 高级战略师 Wallace Mills 对 OpenAI 首席运营官 Brad Lightcap 的采访。以下是采访中的主要内容和要点。本视频长达44分钟，建议大家先关注收藏，以防万一走丢。采访大致分为6个内容。总的来说 ，OpenAI 正通过与企业合作以及开放 API 等方式，推动 AI 技术在全球经济中的应用。他们期待通过持续提升模型能力，让 AI 系统成为真正的智能体，深度融入人类社会的方方面面。同时 ，AI 与人的交互方式也将变得更加自然和人性化。
That being said, I am particularly thrilled to introduce this session. I have had the pleasure of putting together the Business Insights track in partnership with many leaders across NVIDIA. And so we get to kick it off with this conversation, this much anticipated conversation. And while many people are just beginning to or just starting to ride that wave of generative AI, in true NVIDIA fashion, we are already here to talk about what's next. So if you would, please welcome our Vice President of Enterprise Computing, Manuvir Das. Here at NVIDIA, he leads the teams working to democratize AI by bringing full-stack accelerated computing to every enterprise customer. Manuvir has over 30 years of experience in the technology industry. And prior to joining us here at NVIDIA in 2019, he held a range of senior roles at Dell and Microsoft, where he helped create the Azure Cloud Computing Platform and was an affiliate professor at the University of Washington. Welcome, Manuvir.
Thank you. That is so embarrassing. This session is not about me at all. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's a real pleasure to see you. Hope you enjoyed the keynote yesterday, all the announcements from Jensen. You know, one of the things he mentioned in the keynote was our first DGX system, the DGX-1, and he talked about delivering it personally to this startup called OpenAI. And what this group of people has done over the last few years is just absolutely incredible, right? Isn't it? So we're very fortunate today to kick this off in a session where I'm joined by Brad Lightcap. He's the Chief Operating Officer of OpenAI. He's also a Duke Blue Devil, and I was just giving him a hard time because I'm a Badger, and it turns out the bracket just came out for the tournament, and the Badgers and the Blue Devils will probably meet up in the second round. So I'm not going to be a friend of his then, but I am today. So, you know, the interesting thing about Brad is he's obviously got a great role at OpenAI. He's also been called like Sam Altman's secret weapon, you know, the person he really relies upon. So I'm sure he'll have a lot of interesting things to share with us. So Brad, why don't you come on out? Everybody gets to see us walk up here. It's gonna, yeah. Thanks for making it, Brad. Okay.
第一部分 ，OpenAI 与企业合作。许多财富500强企业正在以各种形式使用 ChatGPT。OpenAI 正在帮助企业构建定制化的 ChatGPT 应用，以提高企业各部门的工作效率。
Maybe a little bit about what keeps you up at night.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. This is my first GTC, so we'll see if we're back next year and what that will bring. But yeah, so I'm our COO at OpenAI. I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we bring what we build in our research lab to life for customers and users and partners. And usually people say, well, what does that entail? And I kind of say it entails everything. Other than actually doing the research, they don't let me touch the computers. I just pay for them. But I spend most of my time with our customers and trying to figure out how this technology is going to get integrated into the world. And what keeps me up at night? You know, there's not much I would say right now that keeps me up at night other than Slack. But I think that the next few years are really going to be quite interesting. I think we are still on the flat part of the curve, and the way we see it is this is like the edge of the first inning. And so as this technology gets built and developed, and as we scale these systems up, we think the capabilities are going to be really amazing.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is I think a lot of people think of OpenAI as ChatGPT and think of it as the average consumer going and experiencing the technology. But of course, you've worked a lot now with enterprise companies, right? And most customers that we talk to as NVIDIA, they've built rags of one kind or another in their company by now. And how does everybody do that? They call into OpenAI to do that. So I think both myself and the audience are very curious to hear from you a little bit about what has that experience been like? And I think you're actually quite involved yourself in working with enterprise customers, right? So tell us a little bit about how that's all been going.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, when we launched ChatGPT, use obviously took off, and it was a product that wasn't launched for the enterprise. And we spent about 6 months just trying to figure out what the hell was going on and trying to make sure we had enough GPUs to accommodate our growth. But we spent really the last kind of 6 months of last year actually starting to realize that there was a legitimate and growing set of applications in the enterprise that people were bringing ChatGPT in for. And it's why we ended up launching ChatGPT Enterprise and ultimately our team product, which was a kind of a smaller teams product. But there was a real pull that we felt from not just SMBs and mid-market, but even the Fortune 500. We currently have over 90% of the Fortune 500 using ChatGPT in some form. We're trying to bring them all along on the capital E enterprise version of the product, but it has real pull and it has real fit there. And the amazing thing about it is it's very horizontal. And so every function at the company has, to our knowledge, found some way to make the technology useful for them. And what's amazing is we didn't have to build a lot of really kind of vertical use cases or applications. It's just kind of works. And so if you're on the finance team and you're analyzing a lot of data and you're trying to do reconciliations and all of your tax analysis, you can drop big spreadsheets into ChatGPT and just ask it questions and ask it to do the reconciliation, and it'll kind of just do it. It'll turn your HR people into data scientists if they need to be. And so you've got applications like this that people just kind of found fit with. And we're trying to go and build even better versions of the tools for them.
It is amazing, because, and you're right, I think it's been surprising to people just how good the technology is, right? Now, what we see, Brad, when we talk to enterprise customers is the use case that we see the most traction with is just assistance. Like you got your free intern, right? And no matter what job function you're in, you build a chatbot that does the work that you do, and you get like your 80% answer to get going with, and then you finish it up. Is that sort of what you guys are seeing too?
Yeah, in some use cases, there's a little bit of kind of that last mile engineering. And we have a team that can help customers with that. And so we try and do that work in a very hands-on way. I think some of that will start to fade as the models just get better. And so there's kind of two things we see. Partly is solving for where the model still has deficiencies in its capability. And then partly is just trying to rig up all the kind of the context that the model needs to be able to do a job. I don't know that the second part will go away. There's just the world is very large and messy, but I think the first part people will really feel accelerated as the models get better.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously, Brad, you guys have these great models, the various flavors of GPT that power ChatGPT. There's a whole tools ecosystem that has sprung up around OpenAI, helping people use this stuff. I'm curious, for your company, do you see part of your mission and your role to be a full platform for application developers who use this kind of technology now, or do you just want to be the provider of the core model service?
I think both, if that makes sense. The way that we look at it is everything is just an abstraction on the intelligence, and I think it's just how many layers of abstraction do we want to go build. But we'll build anything that I think accelerates the world's ability to start to kind of pull the technology and pull intelligence into all the nooks and crannies where we think it should be. One, I would say, fairly humbling part of my role is you start to realize how big the world is. and how many places there are that we could apply this technology. And for every ounce of energy I would spend thinking about, should we go build something specific first as a first-party application, I kind of remind myself that there's someone out there who cares a lot more about a specific problem than we ever will, and that's true 99% of the time. And so how do you build a tool set that allows for them to go build the technologies and the tools and applications that they want to build? And then what are the things that we focus on as the kind of primitive pieces, the foundational layers that will enable them and also create great user experiences?
You know, it's interesting because in a way, you're going through the same journey that NVIDIA went through in its history and in the last few years, which is, you know, we have a motto at NVIDIA that we like to spend our time doing the things that nobody else can do. And the things that the others can do, we let them do, right? Because you feel this sort of responsibility that you have an instrument in your hands. And your job is to make that instrument as good as possible and with as much reach as possible and let other people build around it, right? And you've got this amazing instrument now, right? And I'm sure you feel this sense of responsibility that, like you said, you can impact the whole world, right, with this instrument. So I think it's a very powerful thing. And the other thing I was thinking about was, you know, Jensen said it in his keynote yesterday too, when he was talking about the world's industries, you know, and $100 trillion of industries. Just obviously with your background, I'm sure you think about that, because in the tech world, you know, for a long time, the tech world has been about cost. Right? Every company has to have an IT department. There's a budget for that, and it's all about how do I reduce cost. You know, every new technology is disruptive because it's like I'll make something cheaper to do. But I think in the domain that you're in, and we believe that we're in, it's really about new opportunities, new value for companies, right? I mean, nobody ever said GDP has to remain flat, right? It's allowed for things to grow. So, do you guys see it the same way?
Yeah, we do. I think, you know, if you kind of look fundamentally at like what the technology really is, it's kind of just this phase scale up of the ability to offload certain tasks to models that can learn, that have a general learning capability and can get better, you know, predictably better both with scale, but also with more information, more context, and more capability. And I think that's the exciting part for us is, from an enterprise perspective, you think about how complex large businesses really are, and how much low-hanging fruit there is to be able to say, you know what, for this specific thing, we actually can offload parts of this workflow to an AI that can not only do it at a baseline level, but actually can start to do it better and over time, and increasingly kind of own parts of that entire value chain. And it just allows people to focus on other things.
On other things, exactly.
And that's what we see in practice, is, you know, instead of spending 2 hours sitting there tearing your hair out trying to get the revenue reconciliation to work, an AI can kind of explore it and figure it out for you, and you just kind of throw compute at the problem, and all of a sudden it's solved. And that same person that would have otherwise spent that time can just go spend their time thinking about something more important. I say this because I also manage finance and in there. But
I notice how all his examples go back to finance in some way.
It's on the brain. I'm
sure your team is using ChatGPT all the time, as must you be. I think we all now on our phones, right? We've got ChatGPT. I mean, that's where I go. You know, there's a lot of people here, Brad, who come from an enterprise background at this conference and in this room, you know, and I think the question that's on a lot of people's minds is, there's all the, you know, the knowledge of the world and the internet, et cetera, that obviously your models have done a great job absorbing. And then every company has its own sort of repository of knowledge in lots of different places. And, you know, various people
第二
have
部
different
分，
angles
企业
on
部
how
署
to
AI
approach
的
that.
建议。
Obviously, there's RAG.
企业应从特定的
NVIDIA
使用
we do a
案
lot
例
of
入手，
fine-tuning.
针
I'm
对
curious
性的
as
解
to
决棘手问题。
OpenAI, right?
先
What
在
is
小范
your
围内应用，再
what is
逐步
your
扩大规
vision
模，
of
同
how
时要让
enterprise
员工接触
companies
并使用
should really
ChatGPT 等 AI
incorporate
工
all of
具，
the data
发
that
掘
they
其价
have
值。
into the AI process?
Yeah. This is one of it's the question we get the most. And this is probably the thing right now that I think is kind of the least solved problem, which is to be expected. I think we're really early in this phase shift, and you've got this kind of core technology that people are able to poke at and use, but the kind of pipelining and the rigging of all the infrastructure and systems will take some time. But I think that's where what we're starting to see right now is people are able to marry really interesting repositories of data with identification of clear use cases, with understanding of how the model can be applied to both of those things. And you kind of tie those three things together and you can get some really good outcomes. So an example of this recently that we worked on is we worked with Klarna to work on a customer support use case. And Klarna is a very forward-thinking company on AI, so they've been kind of doing this for a while, but they took, I think, the right approach, which was they really started with a very specific implementation of the technology where they constrained the problem. So it was they looked, at a very small part of the workflow with a very specific data set and a very specific implementation of the model. They kind of got that piece to work, and then they kind of just built from there. And now it's handling a large swath of the work and saving them many, many hours. And I think that's kind of the approach we guide toward is don't try and overshoot. So don't try and swallow the ocean, from day one. Don't undershoot, meaning don't lack ambition. But start with something that you can constrain the problem on, get it to work, and then scale it up.
Yeah, that point you just made. I've seen a few interviews you've done, Brad, where you've talked about this more than once, that you have these meetings with companies where they think that somehow Gen AI is going to magically make them a better company, right, and change their position in the market. Whereas it's better to just start with specific use cases, get some value out of those, and then go from there, right?
Yeah.
So as a piece of advice to people in companies who are sort of just getting going, for example, if I look at NVIDIA, Brad, we have now, depending on how you count, a couple hundred of these RAGs, chatbots that we're running, inside NVIDIA for different kind of purposes. And we kind of got there organically. For somebody who's starting off now, how would you recommend that they begin? Because there's a lot of interest in the companies, right? So you're not going to see just one or two. They're going to spread around the company. Do you think they should spend some time first sort of thinking through how it's all done and picking sort of one way to go? Or do you think it's better for them to just sprout organically and see what happens?
Yeah. Well, to your earlier point, yeah, we spent most of 2023 I used to tell our team, we don't really do sales, we do therapy. We would have companies come in, and it would be usually a C-level person that was sitting in our conference room, and about 5 minutes into the meeting, they would be kind of professing all of their problems and things that they were worried about, and they're like, could AI fix all these things for me? And my board wants me to ship something next quarter, and usually we'd have to talk them off the ledge a little bit and get them some water and have them calm down. But once
how much did you charge for the sessions?
Not enough. But once we get to a real part of the conversation, our perspective on this is to kind of do what I just mentioned is really think about where are there places in your business where you feel operationally like there's an opportunity to improve how you how you run. For a lot of people, that happens to be customer support. That's the thing that we hear probably the most frequently. No one likes the quality of their customer support experience. They spend a lot of money on it. It never quite works. It's the thing they hear the most customer complaints about. Yeah. And so it happens to be a place that...
And that's pretty horizontal, right? Because that applies to lots of industries, yeah.
Yep. But we tend to recommend kind of a multi-prong approach. So identify 2 or 3 areas where you have a real gnarly problem, but where, again, you can kind of constrain the problem. So support is this workflow that is this kind of, it's multiple tasks strung together with varying levels of kind of human involvement and human engagement, and a lot of data, and more context helps, right? So you can look for these core ingredients of having, again, going back to the kind of the pyramid of of data, of process, and of model capability. And you can figure out what's that first implementation look like, and then how do you scale it up from there. And so picking a few of those types of projects is these kind of more bespoke platform-based projects. And then the other thing we recommend really is going back to ChatGPT as itself as a product, is starting to give your teams access to the technology. This was not something we really were actively thoughtful about middle of last year, but as we've deployed ChatGPT, as we've had a chance to talk to companies that are using it, democratizing access to the tool and just giving people an opportunity to use it. It does not have to be in a particularly complex form or developed form, but just giving people a chance to say, I know what work I have to do. I can poke around with this thing enough to be able to kind of explore what it's capable of doing. And I'll figure out kind of how to find value in its capability, helping me do my work better.
Yeah.
And that happens very organically, and it happens all the time. And I think companies kind of forget that. They want to have this like very, manicured AI strategy, and there's this big company rollout, and they want these proprietary chatbots. And I think 90% of the value just comes from, right now at least, is coming from just giving people access to the
第
tools
三
and
部
not
分
thinking too much
大
about
模
it.
型
Yeah,
与
I
专
think
用
that's a
模
fair
型。
point because
未来
the
企业
value
可能会
when you
像
try
配
the
置
first
人力
time
资
is
源
so
一样
obvious
配置不同能力的
that,
AI 模型。
you're willing
除了
to
拥有
work
能力
through
强
it,
大的
right? I
大
think
型
that's
通用
a
模
big
型，
thing.
也会有针对
So,
特定
so
领域
Brad,
和任务的
on
专
that
用模
front,
型。
working with these enterprise companies and different use cases, you've also rolled out your custom model with the GPTs now, right? That it's very easy for people to build. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what that is and why you went down that road and how that's going?
Yeah. I'll try and contextualize it maybe in
Yeah.
our kind of a broader picture of our strategy. So we have this very core intelligence in GPT-4 and whatever comes next. And a lot of where we're spending our time is starting to think about how can people make that technology or those models feel more personal to what they're doing, more task specific, improve their performance on any given thing. And so a lot of the work we've done in the last few months, GPTs, custom models, has been in that direction. So you can think of actually GPTs and custom models as opposite ends of the kind of customization spectrum. GPTs are like the dead simple, easy way to take ChatGPT and just basically kind of create a slice of ChatGPT use that is specific to a given task. So if you want to have a model, the ChatGPT kind of remember certain information, be able to call on certain outside data, be able to kind of access a PDF or a spreadsheet, have a certain personality, be able to use certain tools in a predictable, repeatable way, you just kind of ask for it. You actually can configure a GPT without even having to build it. You just describe what you want, and it'll go off and do it. Yeah. And we see that a huge pull for that in the enterprise actually, and it's not surprising because people start to figure out that these are the workflows for which I can use the technology. So I'm just going to encode each of these in a GPT Correct. And just call it. The custom model side is like the full Monty other end of the spectrum. That is basically us taking GPT-4 or any other model and fully trying to figure out how to customize it for a specific use case and maximize its performance in that use case. We do that on a more limited basis. Obviously, it's time and resource intensive for us. But we've had tremendous success early on. We're still kind of experimenting with this, but success early on, improving the model's capability in any number of domains.
Yeah. It is fascinating because obviously you guys really started this whole journey with the very large capable model that is just so surprisingly good at so many things, right? And it just gets better. And then at the same time, if I look at the last year, there's this ecosystem of models that have sprung up, and they're not as capable as the models that you have inside your services at OpenAI, but in different ways they're getting better, right? And they're specialized at certain things. And so how do you see whether it's the larger models getting larger or the smaller models, do you see a role for both within an enterprise, or do you think just the one large model used in lots of different ways?
Yeah, we do see roles for all. I think if the same way, my mental model, by the way, on how to think about kind of enterprise AI deployment is to try and map it as closely as I can to how the kind of the modern enterprise is constructed from a human capital perspective. So the same way that you wouldn't want to hire 25,000 PhDs to run your company because it would be overkill for what it is that you do. You may only need 5 or 10 or whatever you may need. You wouldn't want to take GPT-X or whatever the kind of latest model is to every single problem. Yeah. You may want a diversity of models that have specializations in different things that are kind of fine-tuned on for different use cases. I suspect over time the models will just get generally better, so the need to kind of iterate on them and fine-tune them and try and make them really good at any specific thing, that will dissipate a little bit. But you definitely don't need a like 4-class model to solve some of the things that you would need. And so one of the things we're actually working on is trying to figure out ways to allow people to kind of more dynamically pull models in for any given use case, so that they can kind of like distribute the intelligence a little more. But yeah, no, I think, you know, you kind of have your intern level model, you have your you know, mid-level manager model, you have your senior executive model, you have your subject matter expert model.
And there's a place for each.
And it'll be a diversity of things, but
it actually raises an interesting question. You know, I'm sure the audience is thinking about asking you this question too, given who you are and what you do. You know, if I were to say on a spectrum of, you know, 1 to 10 capabilities of models, where do you think we are today? Are we like 1 out of 10? Or are we 7 out of 10? What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I was going to make one more point on the last comment I just made, which is the interesting thing about what we do, and the challenge from where I sit in how we deploy the technology in the enterprise or anywhere, is you have that kind of map of human capital and trying to kind of map the human capital to the model capability, basically. But the thing that's changing constantly is the model capability. That kind of window is moving every 6 months. And so all this, you know, the model that was your intern model 6 months later is starting to look a little bit like your, you know, mid-level VP model and that mid-level VP model is starting to look a little bit like your, you know, your senior director model.
Okay, you just dissed a whole bunch of VPs.
No offense to any VPs. These are crude analogies. But so that's an interesting phenomenon. And something that companies have to manage dynamically is, and I think it's a net good thing. It's surplus. And so, but we spend a lot of time with companies thinking about what are we bringing to bear on any given problem, and should we be rethinking that combination of things as our model capabilities improve.
And you'd imagine that, you know, it's sort of the new form of IT, right? Because in every company, some humans have to figure all this stuff out and think through, you know, what's being used where. You know, earlier, Brad, when you were talking about the, you know, the initial adoption and dealing with some things, it just reminds me of, you know, when the iPhone came out and there was this general belief that, oh, it's cool for consumers, but companies are going to have a hard time adopting iPhone because it doesn't have this control and that control, and how will IT understand it? And doesn't that sound silly now? Right? So I think let's transition a little bit then to what's next, right? So one of the things that I see, Brad, in
第四部分 AI 的推理和行动能力。OpenAI 期待 AI 系统能发展成为推理智能体，能够从信息中得出洞察，并借此采取行动。这需要提高模型的推理能力，并赋予其在实际环境中执行多步骤任务的能力。
You know, search through it in some fashion. And now the question is, can I use this technology more as an agent, where I try to do things in my company, right? I try to run process, I try to call into things, make actions happen. Do you see that in your interactions with people? And how do you, where do you think the technology is? Because if I've got an assistant and I'm looking at the output, you know, there's a human in the loop. But if I'm making the thing take actions for me, I have to trust it a little further, right? So how do you see that?
Yeah, you know, this is what I'm excited about. This is in many ways kind of how we think at OpenAI about what this technology is useful for and how it should be used. And in some ways, like we laugh a little bit at like the way that kind of AI implementations work today in many cases, is like it is these kind of information retrieval based things, and like they're like the world's like worst databases in some ways. They're really slow, they're really expensive, they're not 100% accurate. You know, they're getting better, but and so why would you use them as a database, or why would you use them for some sort of kind of like high precision recall? It feels like a strange way to use these things. You know, no judgment, but the way that we're really excited to see these systems evolve is as reasoning agents. So how do you actually basically take the model's core capability to extract information from something, think about that information, and then basically take some sort, you know, be able to kind of like synthesize some sort of insight and take action based on that insight.
Right.
So there's two things that have to happen there. One is the model's reasoning capability has to improve. And two is you have to give it some ability to have actuators to basically take action out in the world. And I think those are kind of the next two waves that we're going to start to see merge is we suspect that reasoning is kind of the next area that we will start to see the model, kind of axis of improvement really accelerate on. And then also being able to think about how do you actually be able to give models the ability to work through multi-step problems. So I'll give you an example in like healthcare, for example. It's if you can point a model at a medical record and say, okay, it can extract the information from this medical record. Today, it could do very basic operations. It could maybe summarize that information. It could, it could update that information based on some sort of input. But can you get it to think about that information? And if it can think about that information, can it actually draw some insights about that information in a way that might inform some second step or some third step after that? It could help with follow-up with the patient. It could help with diagnosis of a disease. It could help with placing an order for a prescription. It could then complete the loop and actually talk to the patient about the prescription, both when to pick it up from where and when how it's dosed and when they should take it, and then also remind them later on that they should be taking it 2 weeks later. So that's the way that we think about these systems on a multi-year basis. And I think
do you think that that's going to happen because the core model is going to become better at that, or do you see an approach where there's a separate model or a separate system that is more built for reasoning that complements the existing models?
I think today's systems are actually already pretty good. And if you go to GPT-4 and ask it to reason about that hypothetical situation and explain its thinking kind of step by step, it will explain it to you that way. And so the action path is known to the model. It's now it's just a question of can it take each step in that action path and identify the actual specific thing it should go off and do, and does it have access to what it needs to go do that?
Right. Yeah, that's it's great to hear you say that, because we definitely see that beginning to happen, and obviously the more you all are working on that and OpenAI, the better it is for everyone, right? So Brad, I mean, what from your point of view now? Obviously, we talked about agents a little bit, but from your point of view, if you had to step back as your company, what do you think, if you think of the next, say, let's pick 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years, okay, maybe, in those sort of time frames, what do you think is the big thing, the big shifts that you're working on that can really change the landscape for how people use this technology?
I can't tell you that. I think, there's some things I can't say, but the things I can say, so, I expect, we don't think that we're anywhere near a ceiling on just core capability improvement in the models. We think there's a lot of room in future scale-ups, and so we're very excited about that. I think we're trying to understand how to move the models along axes that are not just kind of like raw IQ. And I think we feel really good about where that work is going. And then I think from where I sit, there's that question that we kind of addressed earlier of what are going to be the standards and frameworks and tools through which the world starts to kind of like rig up the information required for these systems to be useful in production and deployed, in a deployed setting. And so part of it is just building the thing, and then part of it is making sure that we've got a place and a way to deploy the technology that can actually make it useful in production. And
it was definitely an unfair question, and I think you did a very good job handling it. So let me ask
I don't
you
make
the question.
Multi-year predictions anymore.
Let me ask you the question in a different way, right? So obviously, as a company, you can have a focus on just improving the technology as a whole, as you're doing. You can have a focus on, enterprise customers, the industries of the world, right? The commerce of the world, there's a lot of opportunity. So what is your mindset and focus? Do you feel it's your mission to democratize this across all the enterprise companies in the world to help them all get to a better point? Are you more just focused on the individual consumer use cases? Because obviously that's of big benefit to the world too. So
Yeah, our mission is literally to ensure that the benefits of the technology are broadly distributed. And so how do we think about enacting that? Well, one is making sure that people are able to build on top of it. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier about how big and messy the world is, we're going to need to do that anyway. I think the surfaces will change, the abstraction layers will change, but the core of it is we will just try and build ways for people to use the tools effectively, successfully, wherever they want to use them. Greg Brockman, our co-founder, has a nice phrase in this, is how do you think about a world where you have AI like baked into the economy? And the baked in part is when you kind of decompose what that means, and probably reading a little too much into his analogy, is like you've got all these ingredients and you've kind of got to like mix them up and then kind of like let it sit and it starts to work. And we think about it a lot that way too, is how do we actually put the technology in place and bring these other ingredients to bear in a way that kind of once they're mixed up, things just start to work differently. And so that's how we spend a lot of our time trying to enact our mission. And then obviously from a consumer perspective, we look at it similarly. ChatGPT is just an abstraction on our own API. So we just took a model, said make it better at talking to people, and we served it, and it worked. And but it's just a way for people to access it that is not through an API.
Yeah. So Brad, I think it was, what was it?
第5部分
November 30th or
ChatGPT 的发布
so,
，ChatGPT 的
when
热烈
released,
反响出乎 OpenAI 的预料。它显示了这项技术具有极强的人性化特质和应用性。OpenAI 将其免费化，以降低使用门槛。
New thing, and people just got it right away, right? Because it was so easy to see what its impact was, right? So I'm just wondering if you do a little bit of a retrospective for us. It's been a little more than a year. What's your take? Has it surprised you in every way? Are there any if you could look back, are there any things that could have gone differently? Any choices you would have made differently? Yeah.
What about more GPUs, probably? No, I think it did surprise us. I'll speak kind of on my own behalf here a little more than on the company's behalf. But we actually we did not think that GPT-3 as a model class was the model that had kind of crossed the chasm in terms of its usefulness for whether consumer applications or enterprise applications. We thought actually GPT-4 would be kind of the first model that had crossed that chasm. And so a lot of our planning processes had aligned around the launch of GPT-4, which was in March of 2023, so a year ago. But we had finished training GPT-4 months before that. And so we started training GPT-4 in middle of 22. Yeah. And so we're now kind of 2 years from that date. Yeah. So we kind of thought 4 would be the moment. We had to scramble a little bit to accommodate what everyone wanted a little earlier than planned. But it's been amazing to see, and I think it speaks to something that I think will be true in any capacity, regardless of whether you're an enterprise, a developer, an individual, which is that technology has this very innately human characteristic to it. Is you can kind of hand it to someone who's like 5 years old or 95 years old, and they can both find a way to use the technology. It's very natural, and I think that's really important. And so how do we push the systems to continue to improve on that axis too? Yeah. And then 2 is being able to kind of lower the barrier to access. And so making sure that it is accessible to people around the world. That was kind of a thing that we thought we really got right with ChatGPT, was making it free. And the stories we hear from people in far-flungs of the world who use it for things that we could only dream up.
You cannot imagine, right?
Can't imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The point you said about it's so human, that's something that's quite close to NVIDIA too, Brad, because, we do AI, but we're also sort of the graphics company a little bit, right? And so we really see a lot of opportunity where that, firstly, the text interface is so much more human than writing code, but the audio interface, the visual interface, having, we call these avatars, where you basically feel like you're talking to another entity. And of course, at the end of the day, there's other AIs that are converting that into text that is then going into a regular chatbot or what have you. Do you think that is an opportunity for this technology to really expand its reach, on a planetary scale, because it makes it much easier for humans to interact with? Do you think that should be a good area of research and progress?
Yeah, I think that someone born today, the relationship they have with computers will be kind of unrecognizable to anyone sitting in this room. They won't know a world where you have to navigate like this kind of graphical user interface and these hamburger menus and these click down things, and there's a text field, you have to fill something in and you have to hit submit, and then it sends you an email and you have to go over to your inbox and check if the confirmation email was sent, and like whatever these like miserable situations are that we found ourselves in, and like I appreciate that we make do with the tools we have. I just think we'll be completely foreign to someone born today in 10 years, 20 years.
It reminds me of I have
第六部
kids
分
of a few
AI
different
交
ages,
互界面的
and
未
they sort
来
of span the
未来人
advent
们
of
与
the
计算
iPad
机
era.
交互的方式
And
可能会
my
发生
elder
巨大改
boys,
变，
I
从图
remember
形
this
界面
moment
转
where
向更
they
自
were
然的
young,
语音、
and for
视
each of
觉
them, they
等
were sitting
多
on
模
my
态
lap,
交
and
互。
I'm working, as we all do, and they're pressing the keys, and they're trying to press the keys on the keyboard to participate with Dad. And then my daughter, when she reached that stage and she was 2 years old, what she was trying to do was she took her hand and she tried to move it across my screen of my laptop, because that's the interface she knew, right? She didn't know what the keys were all about. So I think those interfaces are going to be quite different as we go forward. And
Yeah, in 10 years, hand your kid a laptop from 2020 or whatever, and watch them talk at it and wait for a response and not get one. That'll be
Not get one, right?
thing to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be something like that.
Exactly.
And the amazing thing is that your company and hopefully our company will have been able to feel like we had something to do with that, right? So it's quite amazing. Brad, I think I think I speak for everyone in the audience when we say, very very appreciative of everything that OpenAI has done. Can't wait to see what you all do next for the world, and we'll be here watching. So all the best to you and the company, and of course at NVIDIA, we're here to help you in any way, and I'll text my boss and see if we can find you some more GPUs. Okay?
Great.
Thank you for the time, Brad.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.